Jacob Reid built his diner empire from the ground up. He believed in good food, great service, and a strong work ethic. But when complaints about toxic management and low morale started flooding in, he refused to believe it. If the employees are unhappy, they should just quit. But when he went undercover as a server in one of his locations, he discovered something far worse than unhappy employees. Watch to the end to see what the employees was planning to do. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. Jacob Reid was used to being in control. As the CEO of SunnySide Diners, a successful chain of family-friendly restaurants, he had always been the one making decisions. His business was built on hard work, good food, and a deep sense of loyalty to both his customers and employees. Over the years, he had carefully managed the growth of his brand, ensuring every diner was a reflection of his values. But something had gone terribly wrong at one of his oldest locations, SunnySide Diner 7. The reports started coming in slowly at first. Sales were down, customer satisfaction was slipping. Employee turnover was alarmingly high, with workers constantly quitting or being forced to leave due to what Jacob could only describe as a toxic environment. But when his management team brought these issues to his attention, their explanations were vague. There was no clear reason why the diner's performance had taken such a dramatic turn. Jacob had heard these excuses before. The location is struggling, the neighborhood has changed, there's a staffing shortage. But something about these answers didn't sit right with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the problem wasn't just about numbers or external factors, it was something internal, something happening within the walls of the diner itself. After weeks of back and forth with his upper management, Jacob made a bold decision. He was going to go undercover, disguised as a regular employee, and find out for himself what was really happening at the diner. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, away from the sanitized reports and corporate meetings. This wasn't just about fixing a diner, it was about saving a piece of his legacy. Jacob entered SunnySide Diner 7 early in the morning, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. He had disguised himself as a new server, nothing special. Black polo, apron, casual shoes. He blended in with the staff and hoped no one would recognize him. His mission was simple: to observe, to understand why his employees were miserable and why customers were leaving. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the weight of something strange in the air. The usual hustle and bustle of a busy diner, the clinking of plates, the chatter of customers was replaced by an odd silence. The hum of the space seemed muffled, like the energy had been sucked out of the room. Jacob could feel it almost immediately. There was tension everywhere he looked. Tina, a waitress with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, handed him a tray of drinks without saying a word. Her demeanor was stiff, and Jacob noticed how her shoulders were hunched, as if carrying a weight no one could see. She didn't even introduce herself properly, just a nod and a quick order for him to start serving. Jacob immediately understood. There was something wrong here, something that went deeper than a few disgruntled workers. As Jacob moved through the diner, he couldn't help but notice how everyone was working in a robotic fashion. They barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it was in a hushed tone, as though they were afraid of being overheard. The energy was low. The staff seemed on edge, and no one seemed willing to engage with him, not the cooks, not the other servers, not the busboys. They just went about their work, heads down, focused only on getting through the shift. Jacob knew he needed to get to the root of the issue, so he tried to engage with a few of the employees when they were taking a short break. But each conversation was the same. No one wanted to talk. They either avoided eye contact or gave short answers. Something was keeping them from speaking up, from sharing what was really going on behind the scenes. Jacob began to feel like an outsider, like no one trusted him enough to speak freely. That's when he noticed the manager, Rick, who was standing near the back, arms crossed, eyes constantly scanning the room. Rick had a commanding presence, but it was clear to Jacob that his leadership wasn't about inspiration or respect. It was about fear. Every time one of the employees made a mistake or took too long to serve a table, Rick's eyes would flash with anger. He would bark orders and make threats, sending employees scurrying to make sure they didn't fall into his wrath. The more Jacob worked, the more he began to understand the toxic culture at SunnySide Diner 7. It wasn't just Rick's harsh management style, it was the environment he had created. The staff was treated like expendable tools with no regard for their well-being or morale. Rick's constant berating only made things worse. The employees didn't feel respected. They felt used, worn out, and tired of being constantly pushed to do more with less. Jacob began to see the small signs of rebellion, whispers among the employees when they thought no one was listening. He overheard a conversation between two cooks about how Rick was pocketing tips that were supposed to go to the staff. They spoke in hushed tones, clearly afraid that someone might hear them. But Jacob had heard enough to know that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was part of a much bigger pattern. Rick was exploiting his employees in every way he could, underpaying them, forcing them to work long hours without breaks, and even taking their tips when they were too afraid to speak out. Jacob couldn't believe what he was hearing. His diner, the very thing he had worked so hard to build, had turned into a nightmare. The environment was toxic, and Rick's behavior was toxic leadership at its worst. Jacob also began to notice how the customers were reacting. The diner had a loyal following, but the energy from the staff was so low that it started to affect the customers. There was no warm welcome when they walked through the doors, no enthusiasm from the servers, and certainly no smiles from the kitchen staff. Jacob watched as two tables walked out in frustration, fed up with the delays and the lack of attention. It was clear, the vibe of the restaurant had shifted, and it was bad for business. As Jacob dug deeper, he uncovered more disturbing truths. It wasn't just bad management, it was systematic abuse. Rick had been skimming wages and refusing to pay for overtime hours. Employees had been written up for calling in sick, even with doctor's notes. Those who dared to complain about these conditions were threatened with termination. Jacob had heard rumors of a staff-wide walkout. The employees were planning to leave together during diner night, the busiest night of the year. Jacob knew that if the employees followed through with the walkout, the diner's reputation would be destroyed. But he also understood their frustration. They weren't just angry about the low wages and bad hours. They were angry because they had been mistreated for far too long. This wasn't just about a job, it was about dignity and respect. Jacob realized that if he didn't act quickly, he could lose everything: his diner, his reputation, and more importantly, his loyal staff. Jacob knew that the first thing he needed to do was to talk to Tina. She was the one person who seemed to have the most insight into what was happening. She had been there the longest, and Jacob trusted her judgment. He found her on her break, sitting alone in the back, staring at the floor. She didn't look up when he approached her, but Jacob could sense the weight of the conversation they needed to have. "I know what's going on, Tina," Jacob said quietly, "and I want to help." Tina looked up, her eyes narrowed in skepticism. "Help? You can't fix this, Jake, not without ripping it all down and starting from scratch." "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Jacob said. "Rick has to go, I'll make sure it happens." Tina let out a long sigh, rubbing her temples. "You don't get it, we're fed up. We've been working here for years, getting nothing in return except more stress and less respect. If we don't make a stand, we'll be treated like this forever." Jacob nodded. He understood now. This wasn't just about fixing the diner, it was about rebuilding trust between the staff and the company. He needed to show them that he cared, that he wasn't just another corporate executive sitting behind a desk. Jacob decided that the only way to solve the problem was to go directly to corporate. He wasn't going to let Rick's reign continue any longer. He called for a private meeting and presented his findings: the payroll fraud, the toxic work environment, and the countless complaints from staff that had been ignored for far too long. He made it clear that Rick had to go, and corporate agreed. With the decision made, Jacob walked into Rick's office. Rick was seated at his desk, distracted by his phone. He looked up in surprise when Jacob entered the room. "You wanted to see me?" Rick asked, his tone defensive. "Actually, yes," Jacob replied, dropping a folder of evidence onto Rick's desk. "You're done, pack your things." Rick's face turned red as he stood up. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fraud, the intimidation, the mistreatment of employees," Jacob said firmly. "And it ends today. You're fired, Rick. You're out of here." Rick's mouth opened in disbelief, but Jacob didn't wait for him to respond. "Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out." Rick hesitated for a moment, his face contorted in rage. But in the end, he grabbed his things and stormed out without a word. With Rick gone, Jacob met with the employees. He promised them a fresh start, better pay, and a workplace that would respect their hard work. He assured them that the diner would be rebuilt from the ground up, not just in terms of business, but in morale. Jacob was determined to create an environment where the employees mattered, where their voices were heard, and where they could feel proud to work for SunnySide Diners again. And with that, the walkout was called off, and the diner's transformation began. As the days passed, SunnySide Diner 7 began to show signs of a true revival. The energy that had once been drained from the staff was slowly but surely replaced with enthusiasm and hope. The walls of the diner, once filled with frustration and resignation, now echoed with laughter and genuine conversations. Jacob had not only saved a business, he had rekindled the spirit that had made SunnySide Diners a beloved name in the first place. But even more importantly, Jacob had learned an invaluable lesson about leadership. The true success of any business wasn't in the profits or the products, it was in the people. When you take care of your team, when you show them that their hard work and well-being matter, success follows naturally. Jacob's journey didn't just end with fixing a single diner. It marked the beginning of a new era for the company, one built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. And as the diner filled once again with the warm buzz of happy employees and satisfied customers, Jacob smiled, knowing that he had done more than just save a business. He had saved a family. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Let us know your thoughts and if you'd like to hear more stories about undercover experiences, leadership, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Stay tuned for more.